when you are writing a scene, it's always important to remember two key elements of everything that's going on in that scene. Now, sometimes the scene will be heavy on one side of this, and sometimes will be heavy on the other. And that is the whole conflict between the plot goals of the story and the theme goals of the story. This can also be called their characters' wants versus their needs. It can also be called their objective versus their intent. Whatever nomenclature you use, it means the same thing. In any story, particularly a story that's dominated by important characters, one of the things that you're going to see is that the characters go on a journey that is usually external. And a prime example of that is something like Jaws. The objective, the plot goal is to catch the shark. But there's another theme goal that's going on underneath that that is equally important. And that is that you have a sheriff, Roy Scheider's character, Brody, who starts out with his plot goal being trying to catch the shark once he realizes it happens. His theme goal is realizing that he is dealing with a world of corruption. And he finds it upon himself to be a good man who will fight against that corruption. And he takes on allies who, like him, are outsiders. You have Richard Dreyfuss as the ichthyologist, the shark expert, who comes from money, who's all head, who's kind of sassy, but is also kind of weak. And you have Robert Shaw playing Quint, who is an outsider that the town folks don't like, but they need him in order to catch the shark. And he's caught up in old world machismo. And so he ultimately gets destroyed by being too caught up in the myth. Brody comes to realize that in a world of corrupt people, remember, Jaws came out after Nixon was forced to resign and after the Vietnam War ended really kind of badly. So it was a showcase of why you can't trust authority. And so he goes during the course of the movie from wanting to fit into the small town to almost rejecting it. It doesn't say he's going to quit, but what it does say is he's now aware that he is a good man, is going to have to fight different kinds of demons. He's not afraid of the water anymore, and he can't believe it. He's been faced with his biggest challenge, and he overcomes it. Similarly, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, what is Indy's plot goal? It is to get the ark. It is to get this important element and keep it away from the National Socialists. His theme goal is he needs to make up for his past. He does all of this heroic daring do, but he's actually kind of a lousy guy. He slept with his mentor's daughter, who there's enough of a kind of creepy hint that she might have been underage, and then he abandoned her. And now he has to work with her again. So he's going to have to face that demonic part of his past and rise above it and try to succeed. And at the end of it, because it was 1981, different cultural context, but coming out of the Carter years, coming after the Iran hostage crisis, we see that as heroic as his external is, his internal is, that he really might not be enough to conquer all the bad people. It's that melancholy if at the very end of the movie, which is kind of mirrored in all of the original trilogy, because I kind of don't admit that Dial of Destiny exists. I didn't hate it, but it's only good for people who saw the movies in real time and have experienced growing older. But it still has that same thing, that it's more internal to him. Finally, look at the vast number of movies about women who achieve. Look at something like The Devil Wears Prada. We have Anne Hathaway. Plot goal is to become someone in the fashion world. And her theme goal is to find her inner real core of competence, where a dragon lady like Meryl Streep can no longer intimidate her. This is the quintessential type story that drove Hollywood A pictures pretty much from the 19 teens all the way until the early 2000s. This is why Hollywood had so many female superstars over time. They had a different career trajectory as men, but you'll notice that the really good ones had 30-year careers the same way. They just had to keep reinventing themselves. So what you see in most of those A pictures, which really should still be one of the driving forces of movies, look at the success of Hidden Figures, look at the success of Barbie, look at the success of In and Out. They all fit in with that paradigm. But the reason is because the struggle for women throughout most of film history were as characters who were put upon a little bit by society, and they had to figure it out. They had to figure it out when to be too transgressive would make them outsiders, but yet they were beloved by their audiences, who would go and see the movies as sort of a cathartic release and as role modeling. Remember that Lucy McGillicuddy in I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball character, she chooses to still go for a career in spite of the fact that everyone around her is convinced she doesn't have any talent. But she is not going to just be a Hausfrau. And what was even more interesting about that is we realize why. Probably during the war, she worked in some factory, so she understands the importance of having her own independence. Society says she's supposed to be a housewife wearing cocktail dresses, pearls, and high-heeled shoes as she's baking cookies. She's not going to do that. And that made her interesting. Mary Richards, Mary Tyler Moore Show. You had a woman who, in the early days of feminism, would go up against males who would at once be patronizing, at once be extremely helpful, and at once be willing to move her forward. So you had very conflicted relations between the male and the female characters, and we saw that in spite of that, people could still work well together. Look at Sex and the City. Sex and the City had a very interesting run, because at the beginning, it was women who were experiencing the freedom of sexuality, the freedom of friendship, the freedom of calling each other on their BS. And now the show in its, and just like that, in life, I'm finding it to be really creepy. It's like watching a reversioning of whatever happened to Baby Jane, with delusional people who still act like they're in their early 20s, and they're now in their 50s, pushing their 60s. And it just doesn't feel comfortable. But again, this conflict between the theme goal and the plot goal and the want and the need and the objective and the intent are ways, when you are writing, if you're aware that every scene has the potential to have those two goals in conflict, you might find the scene itself becomes easier to write.
black pool opened up at my feet again, and I dived in. Next thing I remember, I was going somewhere. It was not my idea. The rest of it was a crazy, coked-up dream. I had never been there before.